Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to Global Adaptation Month pop-up discussion series hosted by EcoAdapt's National Adaptation Forum team. Global Adaptation Month is an initiative aimed at advancing action, awareness, and accountability for the field of climate adaptation. We encourage you to visit www.globaladaptationmonth.org to learn more and to consider sharing a commitment about an existing or upcoming adaptation initiative that you have. I am Molly Johnson, one of the organizers for the National Adaptation Forum and coordinator of Global Adaptation Month, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion focused on policy for adaptation and resilience. Before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping rules. So please place your telephone, cell phone, or computer on mute. This will help us to reduce feedback. It seems like you all already have, so you're on top of it. And if you're using a microphone voice over IP option, please also ensure that your computer is on mute, even if you are listed as muted when you log in. This session will be very conversation oriented. Throughout the half an hour, you can use the chat box to share your thoughts or questions with the group. And you can also message organizers directly via the chat box if you have a question you'd like answered. Throughout the session, we may call on audience members to share their thoughts. If we call on you, you can unmute yourself via the lower left-hand audio button. If you prefer not to speak out loud, you can just communicate via the chat box. And if you would like to be called on, you can message us, the organizers, in the chat box and just tell us that you're kind of raising your hand. So please also message us, the organizers, if you have any technical issues, and we will help you address those to make sure you have a favorable experience. And finally, we'll be recording and posting this session on the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange website for future viewing. And it should be available within the next week at www.cakex.org. I'm very excited to introduce today's facilitator, Chuck Chaitovitz. He is the Vice President for Environmental Affairs and Sustainability at U.S. Chamber of Commerce. For more than 25 years, he has specialized in environment and energy issues, working with companies on strategies to improve their bottom line and competitive positioning. He works with members to support company leadership on sustainability, building the business case, and enabling conditions through common sense public policy and actions of member companies. So thank you, Chuck, for joining us today. And with that, I'll pass it over to you to frame the conversation we hope to have today.
Thanks so much, Molly. I really do appreciate it. And thanks for the National Adaptation Forum and EcoAdapt for offering this opportunity and including the Chamber in this important discussion. For those of you who don't know, and I know there's a few Chamber members that are on the line, but the Chamber is the largest business association, trade association in the world, representing all kinds of sectors and businesses of all sizes. We also have our federation, which is comprised of 2,600 state and local chambers and member trade associations. And as you can imagine, this particular issue of resilience has very relevant meaning in today's environment in responding to the current national public health crisis with COVID-19. Certainly, climate is an issue that we at the Chamber have made a lot of progress on and working with our members. We launched the Task Force on Climate Actions on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last year. Been working with our members, key work streams of importance to them, including resilience and adaptation. So what I'm going to do today is very quickly kind of frame why resilience and adaptation are important to the business community, and I certainly encourage everyone to the extent you'd like to chime in on the chat box or just in conversation to do that. And then I have some examples of things that we're doing at the Chamber in the policy arena to kind of push the ball forward. And then, there's a number of questions that many of you put forward as you were signing up for this, and we'll try to answer those and use those as a way to have conversation with all of you. We only have about 30 minutes, a little bit less than 30 minutes now to do this, so this is going to has to be very efficient, and we definitely want to hear from you in terms of your interests and your priorities in this area. So next slide, please. And I'm not sure if I can do this or not. So the why resilience question is pretty straightforward. That companies and communities are at risk to natural disasters and crisis, and more often than not, there isn't enough preparation and thinking ahead of the next natural disaster. Most of the current federal investment now, and I'm sure many of you know this, is focused on recovery and response to natural disasters. And you can see this in the current public health crisis, and not that there was any way that we could have known, the severity and impact in particular from a public health standpoint or from an economic standpoint, what this crisis would do. But getting ahead of the next disaster, the next crisis is important. How can we promote that through good public policy? I think that two of the issues that I work on in verticals, that I call them, are climate and water. And by looking at issues like energy, health, and water, you can see that these are lifeline infrastructure that are important to the resilience and ability to respond for both companies and communities. The business community needs to be at the table because of the risks posed to the company, and we can see the economic impact of crisis like that we're experiencing now, as well as to their employees and the communities where they operate. And then we at the Chamber certainly support issues around flexible, not one-size-fits-all public policy, and we want to provide a toolbox of solutions. So not just one single approach is going to work in this instance, and we'll walk through some of the things that are happening now that kind of give you a sense of that toolbox. Before I move on to this, from this framing slide, I mean, that's really a quick overview. Would anyone like to raise any issues, questions, or concerns about any of the points made here? All right. Well, I must have done a really good job at framing that, but if I didn't, please don't hesitate to include something in the chat box or reach out. Next slide, please. So this is just a list of some of the things that we're doing at the Chamber and some of the existing policies that exist, that are in the pipeline or in implementation to work on. So you may be familiar with the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, or BRIC program out of FEMA. It is a modification of the Stafford Act, which is the way in which the country responds to natural disasters, to focus on pre-disaster mitigation. So right now we spend a lot of money on post-disaster. When natural disasters are implemented or declared and money is appropriated, money goes to the recovery effort. Now there's a dedicated fund of 6% of those funds goes in a pre-disaster pot, and these don't have to be appropriated funds. So as soon as the post-disaster money moves forward, the money is put into the pre-disaster fund. FEMA is finalizing the way in which the program will work. The specific guidance is well underway. There was a comment period last summer, which the Chamber commented on, and now they're finalizing that guidance, and it should come out probably by the beginning of May is what they're expecting, but that could be delayed. We're looking to, with our members, holding a briefing of how to access that money, and then we've held a couple of forums around the country to do that with key stakeholders, and depending on how the things shake out with the COVID-19 crisis, maybe we'll be back working together in time to do something similar during the middle of the summer this coming summer. I also wanted to highlight a few other policies that are kind of in the pipeline. So the Chamber has been supportive of another key tool, which we think will be very helpful, the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund Act. There's a companion bill in both the House and the Senate. And what it does is it's similar to the SRFs for drinking water. It sets up low interest loans that the states can provide to communities to implement pre-disaster mitigation projects. And it goes across the range of hazards from droughts and floods, wildfires, and so forth. And I think things, issues like, public health, we need to be thinking about those and how we might incorporate that thinking into this kind of legislation as it moves forward. There also is legislation that would permanently authorize the CDBG disaster recovery program. Now there's funding that HUD just gets from appropriation when a disaster is declared to go through the CDBG process to communities, but it's not permanently authorized, and so it should be permanently authorized. The bill that's out there now has a number of issues that we think could be improved, including having a dedicated pot for pre-disaster mitigation. And so we've suggested some of those things, and I'm happy to share our thoughts on that with all of you if that's something of interest. There's also a provision that passed as part of the America's Water Infrastructure Act in the fall of 2018, in the fall of 2019 rather, which calls on water systems to better prepare for issues around water security. And so they're in the process of, EPA is in the process of promulgating guidance for water systems to do their risk assessments. It's just an example of how policy can help drive infrastructure to better prepare. And then, the Chamber with our members is developing policy principles by which we can evaluate policies going forward, so we can more quickly react to ways in which the policy is developed both at the federal and the state level. The last thing I'll mention is that the Chamber Foundation, which is our 501c3 arm, the Chamber has something called Resilience in a Box. It's a checklist primarily for small businesses to help them prepare ahead of the next natural disaster. And there's we took a survey a while back that 65% of small businesses don't have business continuity plans in place. And so this is an important issue to consider. How do we use policy to encourage businesses to do that? And something that we certainly are proposing as part of some of the principles or other ways we might move forward is to encourage perhaps a pilot program that could pilot funding for small businesses to help them prepare and build business continuity efforts. With that, I'm happy to move on to the questions that you all sent in, but want to stop there. And again, if there's other issues or questions that I missed, I'm happy to jump in. Other questions or concerns?
I just had a question. This is Ken McClune. I was wondering what resilience, if there was a definition for resilience that the Chamber has, or is it in line that you're thinking of it through sort of the business sort of preparation planning?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. There are a lot of, much like definitions of sustainability, there's a lot of definitions of resilience, but in its essence, it's the ability to recover more effectively when a crisis hits. And so being prepared ahead of that, either through a planning process or through building modern, resilient, hardened infrastructure of all kinds, whether that's for health or lifeline infrastructure like water and energy. So I hope that answers your question. It's a pretty fluid issue, as you know, and so we want to consider that, as certainly as climate policy moves forward, it's an important issue both on the mitigation and on the adaptation front. But in a broader sense, when looking at issues like responding to the COVID-19 crisis, I think we need to consider issues that can help us prepare for the next one and also put Americans back to work.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and particularly when you're dealing with so many different sized organizations across so many different contexts, very sort of high level sort of thinking preparation makes sense.
No, I appreciate that. Other questions or issues that folks would like to raise? It's always hard to get the first one going.
Hey Chuck, it's Molly. It looks like in the chat box we have Alyssa Kern submitted one about, could you please describe how these funding sources are being directed to using data better for preparedness? Example, better information sharing across departments, such as sharing maps for wildfire management, or better use interfaces to find data more easily?
Well, that's a great question. There are some provisions in there that call for more collaboration across the USG interagency community. But in fact, that's one of the principles that we included in many of the letters that we've already sent up to Congress to encourage their action on things like the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund Act or the change to the CDBG-DR program. In our principles are better interagency coordination, both at the USG level and then working both with state and local partners. An important effort, something that we found is that, there's, and because I'm so, engaged with the water community as well, there's folks at the state level that are water planners, but many of the water planners, and as you may know, they're not engaged as much as they'd like with the emergency management organizations. And so how do we make sure that those discussions occur? And just by encouraging that through smart policy, I think that's one way to look at it. Well, great question.
Awesome. Thanks for answering those, and I think we can move on to the group discussion now.
No, I appreciate it. So this is a good question. I think it goes to our approach on more tools and more coordination. So those, I think, are the two things. How do you get policymakers to mainstream this into everything that they do? It does need to be, you need to proactively think about ways in which you prepare ahead of the next situation, because our inclination is always to be in response mode and be reactive and to spend money only on things, to build back things the way that they were before. And maybe that's not the best way to do it. And maybe that if we thought ahead, we could reduce, the cost to taxpayers going forward. And that's, I think, ultimately, you want to save lives and property. And you want to reduce the cost to taxpayers through smart public policy. And that's, I think that some of these things, thinking ahead, having coordination, and then the more tools, the better. Things that that provide various sources of funds and opportunities for technical assistance that can help both companies and communities be more resilient. But great question. And I hope that answered your question. If there's other issues folks would like to raise, I'm happy to have that discussion. We have about 10 minutes left, so plenty of time. Okay, let's.
Helen Rain. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Helen Rain just submitted a question about a list of grants that people could apply for. Are you aware of any?
Well, at this point, the current pre-disaster program is very small, and it's transitioning now to the BRIC program through FEMA. And so, the grants that will be available probably by the end of this year, I'd imagine, is this next round of this first round of BRIC funding that should be forthcoming once the guidance is delivered. But really, the focus on pre-disaster has not been there in the past, and so that's this is an important issue. And the other thing is that we need to get more funding in the pipeline through existing programs to address these issues. So, the appropriation, even getting it authorized, BRIC is good because it doesn't need to be appropriated, but all these other things that we're going to do, appropriations is part of that. And so, having that communication with policymakers about the importance of this issue will be key.
And I think in connecting to that sort of a funding question, do you have any suggestions for what type of planning or preparation should happen first to make a project more eligible for funding? This question's from Kurt.
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I don't think that because many of these programs are still either haven't been, they're still in legislative form, or the guidance is being developed by FEMA in the case of the BRIC program. I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I will write that down, and certainly I'm happy to follow up with the group to make sure we were able to get that answer to you. So what are some ways that,
Yeah,
go
ahead.
Well, I think that this is gets to the coordination question. I think I think that I have the same answer there, that that we're interested in the overall coordination, both at the federal and the state, between federal and federal and federal and state and state and state and state and local, and the private sector. So that to me is the way to help do that, and to have policies that encourage that, make it easy for staff to do that. I think that's what you want. I hope that answers the question. Next question.
Yeah.
I think
so I moved on to this next one.
I think that's the same kind of thing.
Okay. This is one that I know some people entered in the chat as well, so definitely a good topic to cover.
Yeah, I mean, so the third, so as all of you know, I mean, the third package passed about a week and a half ago. It really focused on direct relief to individuals and to companies. What we're hearing on the next package will be areas where there's gaps in the previous three proposals or legislation that passed. So, for instance, something that the chamber encouraged, it's clear that the $350 million for small businesses will not be enough, and so we called on an additional amount of money to be included there for small business, and so it looks like Congress may look to include another $250 billion in that pot in this next bill, and I'd imagine that legislation will focus on that. That being said, we are very much committed modernizing, American infrastructure of all kinds to build climate resilience is one of our top priorities, and so that any package that has infrastructure in it, we would encourage things that could help build resilience ahead of the next disaster. So how can we, build shovel-ready adaptation projects? How can we get money in the hands of small businesses to help them prepare? And then, what are the ways in which we can ensure that we're responding to the public health crisis, but also putting Americans back to work? And so I think it's certainly a key element that these projects can, help us prepare and be a better use of taxpayer money, but also get Americans working again, because that's key to the economic recovery. So great question. And, if I didn't answer it to where you guys want it to be, please don't hesitate to reach out, and happy to talk further about, working on that issue going forward. So I mean, so one thing that we've been really working on in the water community with the water community is focusing on small communities and small companies, because they have unique issues, and in particular in water, where there's significant numbers of small communities that have their own water systems. So there's 50,000 or so small water systems across the country, and that's, if you compare that to electricity or telecom, I mean, you're talking exponentially more. And so rural communities, in terms of building this lifeline infrastructure, they have unique needs, where where you have your own water system, where might have an electric co-op, where there's things, in getting, lifeline healthcare infrastructure in place. This is key to ensuring that we are able to respond to small communities, during the current crisis, but help them be well prepared ahead of the next one. And so, those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. I don't know that I have any specific practices, but those issues are part of the policy environment. I mean, we're working very closely with EPA and USDA in particular on how do we better prepare rural communities going forward. And so happy to be part of that discussion with all of you, as we work through that issue. And it's slow going, because there's a lot of stakeholders involved, and important for us to be smart about. Molly, there's about 3 minutes left, so we can have there's room for other conversations or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. We do have one from Jasmine in the chat, and she raised a good question about to what extent is the challenge a funding challenge versus a standards or best practices question versus a legal challenge?
Another thing that is part of the current policy consideration, I think that there's a number of organizations that are out there that are promoting smarter, flexible codes that can help drive some of the changes that need to happen. And this is all at the local level. We at the Chamber, think that those decisions are rightly made at the local level, but certainly supporting flexibility as those go forward, as ways to encourage more action. I think that's really important. And the notion of the co-benefits was raised in the previous question, a key point to addressing those issues. There are those codes, those standards can help drive the use of funding. And so, I think it's all very much an integrated discussion.
Thanks, Chuck. And I think finally, and obviously the group can enter their thoughts on this in the chat box, but what are your thoughts on next steps to move forward to facilitate this, the implementation of policies like these?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we really want to see is other tools like the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund implemented, so that communities can have other ways to access money that drive action. And so those are the kinds of policies we're going to be focusing on. And I think, in the response to the current public health crisis, there'll be every opportunity to encourage these kinds of solutions. Where, in fact, we're hearing that the Democratic leadership in the House is considering things like the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund as part of a infrastructure package. And so, if that's the case, how can we work with them and all of you to kind of push these solutions forward?
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us today, Chuck, and sharing your insight. Thanks to everyone else who is on the call. And we will share this recording with you all and the slides, so you can refer back to them, and also Chuck's contact. So if you have any questions for him directly. I do want to circle back and just say this was brought to you by Global Adaptation Month. And if you are working on projects similar to what Chuck's talking about, local policies that are going to help build resilience resilience in your communities for businesses or governments, please submit a commitment to our website, www.globaladaptationmonth.org, and help your project stay accountable and encourage action across the U.S. and beyond. And also, you can attend another one of these events we have going on throughout the month, and you can find those all on the website. So thanks again for everyone joining us. Chuck, do you have any final words you want to share?
No, thank you so much, everyone. Really do appreciate it and look forward to following up with everyone, and stay safe out there.
Yeah, stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chuck.